The great meeting hall of Concordia Prime had never seen such a gathering. Representatives from every major species in the galaxy sat around the massive circular table, their voices creating a symphony of frustration and defeat. The air recyclers worked overtime to handle the different atmospheric requirements of dozens of alien species, creating a strange mix of scents and sounds. Admiral Zexathari stood at the center of the room, her crystalline body catching and reflecting the soft lights in rainbow patterns. Her people, the crystalline hegemony, had ruled space for over 2,000 years. They had never met a problem they could not solve with their advanced technology. Until now. The barrier remains unchanged, she announced, her voice carrying the weight of disappointment. Our quantum disruptors, our most powerful weapons, barely made it shimmer. The energy readings show that it actually absorbed our attack and became stronger. Around the table, other representatives nodded in understanding. They had all tried. They had all failed. Commander Vorth of the Steel Dominion slammed his metal fist on the table. His people were warriors, builders of the greatest war machines in known space. Our antimatter warheads should have torn a hole in reality itself. Instead, they disappeared into that thing like raindrops into an ocean. 3,000 years we have tried to break through. 3,000 years of failure. The void gate hung in space like a giant ring made of black metal. It was ancient, older than any known civilization. Scientists believed it was a gateway to another part of the universe, possibly containing resources and worlds beyond imagination. But the energy barrier that surrounded it had never allowed anyone to pass through. The barrier looked like a soap bubble made of pure light, beautiful and completely impossible to break. Dr. Nexara of the Mind Collective floated above her chair, her tentacles moving in complex patterns as she spoke. We have tried everything. Brute force, subtle manipulation, temporal attacks, dimensional rifts. The barrier adapts to each attempt. It learns from our methods and becomes immune to them. Perhaps, suggested Elder Thane of the Wisdom Keepers, his ancient voice barely above a whisper, we should accept that some things are meant to remain closed. Our ancestors spoke of doors that should never be opened. A rumble of disagreement filled the room. Too many resources had been spent. Too many expeditions had failed. The promise of what lay beyond the barrier had driven exploration efforts for millennia. In the back of the Great Hall, almost overlooked among the towering aliens and floating energy beings, sat Captain Sarah Chen of the human delegation. She was small compared to most of the other representatives, wearing a simple blue uniform that looked primitive next to the advanced environmental suits and energy fields of the other species. Humans were the newest members of the Galactic Council. They had only discovered faster-than-light travel 50 years ago, making them children in the eyes of species that had ruled space for thousands of years. Most council members barely acknowledged their presence at these meetings. Sarah tapped notes into her tablet, a device that looked like a toy compared to the holographic displays and neural interfaces the other species used. She recorded everything, every failed attempt, every energy reading, every frustrated comment from the representatives. The young human seems interested, Admiral Zexathari observed, her tone suggesting amusement rather than respect. Perhaps the newest members of our council have thoughts to share. The attention of the entire hall focused on Sarah. She felt the weight of dozens of alien eyes, sensors, and telepathic probes examining her. Some species had been exploring space when her planet was still covered in ice. Others had built empires that spanned entire star systems before humans had even discovered fire. Sarah stood up slowly, her chair making a small squeak that seemed loud in the sudden silence. I would like to request copies of all sensor data from previous attempts, she said simply. Energy patterns, frequency analysis, structural scans, everything you have. A few aliens made sounds that might have been laughter. The request seemed almost childish in its simplicity. Commander Vorth leaned forward, his metal face showing what might have been a smile. Child, we have tried every analysis method known to science. What could your young species possibly see that we have missed? Maybe nothing, Sarah admitted honestly. But fresh eyes sometimes see things that experienced ones overlook. My people have a saying about it. And what saying is that? Asked Dr. Nexara, her mental voice carrying curiosity. Sarah smiled, an expression that seemed to confuse several of the alien representatives. When you have been staring at a problem for too long, sometimes you need someone who does not know it is impossible to solve it. Elder Thane made a sound like wind through dry leaves. Wisdom, perhaps, though spoken simply. Very well, human. You may have access to our data, though I wonder what your primitive computers can process that our systems cannot. Thank you, Sarah said, sitting back down and returning to her note-taking as if she had not just requested 3,000 years' worth of scientific data from the most advanced civilizations in the galaxy. Admiral Zexathari called for order as the meeting continued. Plans were discussed for a final coordinated assault on the barrier using the combined fleets of all council members. It would be the largest military operation in galactic history, bringing together every advanced weapon and technology available. As the representatives debated the logistics of this ultimate attempt, Sarah continued taking notes. She watched the holographic displays showing the barrier, studied the energy readings that scrolled past in languages she was still learning to read, and listened to the frustration in voices that had been trying to solve this problem since before. Her species had built their first cities. The meeting lasted for 6 hours. When it finally ended, the other representatives filed out in small groups, continuing their discussions in the corridors of the massive space station. Some looked defeated, others angry, many simply tired of a problem that had consumed so much time and effort. Sarah remained in her seat until the hall was empty, except for the cleaning drones that emerged to prepare the space for the next meeting. She looked at her notes, filled with technical data she was only beginning to understand, and observations that might mean nothing at all. Her communicator buzzed with an incoming message from her ship. Chief Engineer Rodriguez wanted to know how the meeting had gone. Sarah smiled and began typing her response. They said it was impossible, she wrote. Sent over 3,000 years of data proving it. Coming back to the ship now. Get the crew together. We need to have a talk. As she walked through the corridors of Concordia Prime, passing aliens who barely noticed her presence, Sarah thought about the barrier. Every species had approached it with their most advanced technology, their most sophisticated theories, their most powerful weapons. They had failed because they knew too much about what should and should not work. But humans were still learning the rules of space. They did not yet know all the things that were supposed to be impossible. Sometimes, Sarah thought, that might be exactly what was needed. The shuttle ride back to the human research vessel Endeavour was quiet. Sarah spent the time reviewing the data packets that had been transmitted to her ship. 3,000 years of failure, documented in perfect detail. To the other species, this data represented the proof that the barrier could not be broken. To Sarah, it looked like the beginning of a very interesting challenge. The research vessel Endeavour looked like a floating scrapyard compared to the sleek alien ships docked at Concordia Prime. Where other species built their vessels with smooth curves and perfect symmetry, humans seemed to prefer a more practical approach. Antenna arrays stuck out at odd angles, extra fuel tanks were bolted wherever they would fit, and the entire hull was covered in patches and modifications that had been added over years of deep space exploration. Captain Sarah Chen walked through the main corridor, passing crew members who were busy with 1,000 small tasks that kept a human ship running. The artificial gravity generators hummed with a slight vibration that other species found disturbing, but humans had learned to find comforting. She found her senior staff gathered in the main meeting room, a space that doubled as a dining hall and emergency shelter. Chief Engineer Rodriguez was already at work, his tablet connected to a holographic projector that displayed the barrier data in 3 dimensions. Dr. Petrov sat nearby, running calculations on his laptop while simultaneously eating a sandwich and humming what sounded like an old Earth song. So, Rodriguez said without looking up from his display, the fancy aliens cannot break through this thing. What makes us think we can do better? Sarah took a seat and activated her own display, showing the energy readings from the failed attacks. Because we are not trying to do better. We are trying to do different. Lieutenant Kim, the ship's navigator, and part-time physicist, leaned forward to study the data. The barrier absorbs energy and uses it to strengthen itself. Every attack makes it more powerful. It is like trying to break down a door by feeding it. Exactly, Sarah said. Every species has tried the same approach. Hit it harder, hit it. with different types of energy hit it from multiple directions. But they are all still hitting it. Dr. Petrov looked up from his calculations, a piece of lettuce hanging from his beard. So we do not hit it? Oh, we hit it, Rodriguez said, his eyes lighting up with the expression that usually meant he was about to suggest something dangerous. But we hit it wrong. Sarah smiled. This was why she loved working with humans. Other species would spend months in committee discussing the theoretical implications of new approaches. Humans would start building something and figure out the theory later. Show me what you are thinking, she said. Rodriguez manipulated the holographic display, showing the Endeavor approaching the barrier. The barrier learns from attacks. It adapts to energy patterns and frequencies. But what if we do not attack it? What if we make it attack itself? He began sketching modifications to the ship's systems with his finger, drawing lines of force and energy flows that made no sense according to conventional physics. We use controlled nuclear explosions to create specific vibration patterns, not to damage the barrier, but to make it resonate with its own frequency. That is insane, Kim said, which in human terms was often the highest form of praise. It gets better, Rodriguez continued, clearly enjoying himself. We use the ship itself as the delivery system, mount extra engines here, here, and here. He pointed to locations on the ship's hull that would normally be considered structurally unsound for engine placement. Create a controlled tumbling pattern that generates the exact frequency sequence we need. Dr. Petrov had stopped eating and was now scribbling equations across multiple pages of paper. The mathematics are ridiculous. The stress on the ship would be enormous. The crew would experience forces that should be lethal. Should be, Sarah noted. But humans have survived worse than we should before. The timing would have to be perfect, Kim added, running her own calculations. One mistake and we either miss the resonance entirely or create a feedback loop that destroys us. Or, Rodriguez said with a grin, we succeed and prove that the most impenetrable barrier in galactic history was just waiting for someone crazy enough to knock on it properly. Sarah looked around the table at her crew. Other species chose their space explorers based on intelligence scores, psychological stability, and proven track records. Humans seemed to select for people who heard, "That is impossible," and responded with, "Hold my beer." What would we need? She asked. Rodriguez pulled up engineering specifications for the modifications he had in mind. Industrial adhesive. Lots of it. The good stuff that is technically illegal in most star systems. Extra. Fusion reactors, probably stolen from a shipyard, and enough nuclear warheads to make the weapons inspectors nervous. I can get the reactors, Kim said immediately. My cousin works at the Luna shipyards. He owes me a favor. The warheads are easy, Dr. Petrov added. I still have contacts in the military research division. They have been looking for an excuse to test some of their new designs. And the adhesive? Sarah asked. Already on board, Rodriguez said proudly. I bought a whole cargo bay full during our last supply run. You never know when you might need to stick something to something else in space. Sarah called up the tactical display and began planning their approach vector. The barrier was located in a system at the edge of Council space, surrounded by research stations and military vessels from every major species. Any attempt to reach it would be observed and recorded by hundreds of sensors. They will try to stop us, she said. Let them try, Rodriguez replied. By the time they figure out what we are doing, we will either be through the barrier or spread across several star systems as component atoms. Encouraging, Kim muttered, but she was already calculating flight paths and approach vectors. Sarah activated the ship's communication system and connected to the Galactic Council's central command. The face of Admiral Zexathari appeared on the screen, her crystalline features showing mild curiosity. Captain Chen, I trust you have reviewed the data we provided. Yes, Admiral. I would like to request permission to make an attempt on the barrier. The silence that followed was filled with the sound of alien voices conferring in the background. When Zexathari returned, her expression suggested she was trying not to laugh. Captain, your species has been part of the Council for only 50 years. You have no experience with projects of this magnitude. What could you possibly accomplish that we have not already attempted? Maybe nothing, Sarah admitted. But the data shows that every previous attempt has used the same basic approach. We would like to try something different. Different how? Sarah looked at her crew, all of whom were trying to keep straight faces. I would rather not discuss the details over an open channel. If we fail, no one will remember. If we succeed, the method will be obvious. Admiral Zexthari's image flickered as she consulted with other council members. The discussion in the background grew more animated, with several voices expressing what sounded like amusement. Very well, Captain Chen. You have permission to make your attempt. The council will observe from a safe distance. I should warn you that our probability calculations give you a very small chance of success. How small? Sarah asked. Effectively 0. Our computers estimate a 0.0001% chance that you will breach the barrier, and a 67% chance that your ship will be destroyed in the attempt. I like those odds, Rodriguez said quietly, and Sarah had to agree. Thank you, Admiral. We will begin our approach in 72 hours. After the communication ended, Sarah looked around the table at her crew. Well, team, we have 3 days. To modify our ship in ways that will probably kill us, plan an approach that defies several laws of physics, and attempt something that the most advanced civilizations in the galaxy have declared impossible. Sounds like a normal Tuesday, Dr. Petrov said, returning to his sandwich. I will start welding engines to the hull, Rodriguez announced, gathering his tools. I will file the flight plan, Kim added, though I think I will list our destination as somewhere else and our mission as probably impossible. Sarah stood up and looked out the viewport at the distant stars. Somewhere out there, the barrier waited, having defeated every attempt to break it for 3,000 years. In 3 days, it would face its first human attempt. She had no idea if their plan would work, but she knew that humans had a talent for doing things that should not be possible, usually by refusing to acknowledge that they were impossible in the first place. The endeavor looked even more ridiculous than usual as it approached the barrier system. Extra engines jutted out from the hull at angles that made experienced pilots feel dizzy just looking at them. Fuel lines ran across the ship's surface like metallic veins, held in place by what appeared to be enormous amounts of industrial tape and hope. Captain Sarah Chen sat in her command chair, watching the tactical display as dozens of alien ships moved to safe observation distances. The Galactic Council had gathered representatives from every major species to witness what most expected to be either a spectacular failure or an equally spectacular explosion. All stations report ready, Lieutenant Kim announced from the navigation console. Her hands moved across controls that had been modified so heavily that the original manufacturers would not have recognized them. Chief Engineer Rodriguez's voice crackled over the intercom from the engine room. Captain, I want to officially state for the record that what we are about to do violates at least 16 safety protocols and probably several laws of physics. Noted and logged, Sarah replied. Are the engines ready? They are ready to do things that engines were never meant to do. The computer keeps asking me if I am sure about the calculations. I stopped answering because I am not sure about anything anymore. Dr. Petrov looked up from his science station, where multiple screens showed energy readings that fluctuated in patterns that made no conventional sense. The nuclear charges are armed and synchronized. The timing sequence is loaded into the navigation computer. If we are going to have second thoughts, now would be the time. Sarah activated the ship's communication system, opening a channel to the observing fleets. This is Captain Chen of the Endeavor. Beginning approach to the barrier. We will maintain an open channel throughout the attempt. Admiral Zexthari's voice responded from the flagship of the crystalline hegemony. Captain, our sensors show unusual modifications to your vessel. Are you certain your ship is space-worthy? Space-worthy is a relative term, Sarah replied. We prefer to think of it as space-capable with enthusiasm. The barrier hung in front of them like a giant soap bubble, made of pure energy. It was beautiful in a way that made it hard to believe something so elegant could be so impossible to breach. The surface rippled with colors that had no names, shifting and flowing in patterns that seemed almost alive. Beginning approach sequence, Kim announced. First engine burn in 10 seconds. The Endeavor accelerated toward the barrier, but not in any pattern that made sense to conventional space travel. Instead of a straight line, the ship began to follow a complex path that curved and twisted through space. The extra engines fired in carefully timed bursts, creating a rhythm that sounded like a mechanical heartbeat. Initiating rotation sequence, Kim said, her voice tight with concentration. The ship began to spin on multiple axes simultaneously, creating forces that would have been lethal to most alien species. The humans aboard felt like they were inside a washing machine, but they had trained for this, sort of. On the alien observation ships, sensor operators watched in disbelief as the human vessel performed maneuvers that defied common sense. The Endeavor corkscrewed through space, trailing plasma and what appeared to be pieces of its own hull. "Are they having a mechanical failure?" Commander Vorth asked his sensor officer. "No, sir. According to their broadcasts, this is intentional." The first nuclear charge detonated precisely 1 kilometer from the ship, creating a flash of light that momentarily blinded several sensor arrays. But instead of being damaged by the explosion, the Endeavor used the blast wave to alter its trajectory, riding the energy like a surfer on a wave. "That is impossible," Dr. Nexara transmitted to her science team. "They are using nuclear explosions for navigation." The second and third charges followed in quick succession, each one perfectly timed, to push the ship into an even more complex pattern of movement. The Endeavor tumbled, spun, and twisted through space, leaving a trail of radiation and confused aliens in its wake. "The barrier is beginning to react," Dr. Petrov reported. His instruments showed the energy field fluctuating in ways that had never been recorded before. "The frequency patterns are changing. It is trying to adapt to our approach." "Good," Sarah said. "That means it is paying attention." The fourth nuclear charge detonated directly beneath the ship, creating a pillar of energy that lifted the Endeavor like a rocket. But instead of being destroyed, the ship rode the explosion upward while continuing its impossible dance through space. On the barrier itself, patterns of light began to form, swirling and shifting as the energy field tried to analyze the approaching threat. But the human ship was not following any recognized attack pattern. It was not even following any recognized flight pattern. "It is like they are performing some kind of ritual," Elder Thane observed from his ship. "A dance of madness." The fifth charge was the largest, detonating in a sequence of smaller explosions that created a complex rhythm of pressure waves. The Endeavor surfed these waves like a dolphin riding ocean swells, its hull groaning under stresses that should have torn it apart. "Hull integrity at 60% and falling," Rodriguez reported. "But we are still in one piece, which honestly surprises me." The barrier was now fluctuating wildly, its surface rippling with energy patterns that grew more complex by the second. The alien observers watched their instruments in amazement as readings spiked beyond their measurement capabilities. "The barrier is resonating," Dr. Nexara reported to the Council ships, "but not with any frequency we have seen before. It is creating new patterns, trying to match the human approach." The sixth nuclear charge exploded just as the Endeavor completed its final rotation, sending the ship tumbling end over end toward the barrier. To outside observers, it looked like the humans had lost control and were about to crash into the energy field. But Sarah knew better. Every spin, every explosion, every impossible maneuver had been calculated to create one specific effect. The ship was not out of control. It was exactly where it needed to be, moving exactly as it needed to move. "Energy resonance achieved," Dr. Petrov announced. "The barrier is matching our frequency." The Endeavor struck the barrier, and for a moment, nothing happened. The ship hung in space, pressed against the energy field like an insect trapped in amber. Alien sensors recorded impossible readings as the barrier tried to analyze and adapt to the human approach. Then something changed. The barrier began to fluctuate in perfect harmony with the ship's energy signature. Instead of absorbing the Endeavor's kinetic energy and becoming stronger, the field began to cancel itself out, creating interference patterns that grew larger and more complex. "It is working," Kim whispered, hardly believing her own instruments. The barrier did not explode or shatter. It did not tear open like fabric or melt like metal. Instead, it simply stopped existing, as if someone had flipped a switch and turned it off. One moment it was there, impenetrable and eternal. The next moment there was only empty space. The Endeavor tumbled through the gap, trailing smoke and debris but somehow still intact. Behind them, the void gate hung open and unguarded for the first time in 3,000 years. The alien fleets sat in stunned silence, their sensors struggling to process what they had just witnessed. The impossible had happened. The humans had succeeded where every advanced civilization had failed. Captain Chen. Admiral Zexthari's voice finally came over the communication channel. How did you do that? Sarah looked around the bridge at her crew, all of whom were grinning despite the fact that they were still tumbling through space and several systems were on fire. We asked nicely, she replied. The Endeavor's engines finally managed to stabilize their flight path, pointing them toward whatever lay beyond the Void Gate. As they flew deeper into the unknown region, Sarah realized that their real adventure was just beginning. Behind them, the barrier was gone, leaving only empty space and a lot of very confused aliens. The humans had done the impossible, not by being smarter or stronger than everyone else, but by being just crazy enough to try something that made no sense to anyone else. So, Rodriguez said over the intercom, what do we do for an encore? Sarah smiled as she looked ahead into unexplored space. I guess we find out what was so important that someone built an impenetrable barrier to keep it locked away. The Endeavor flew on, carrying its crew of magnificent lunatics into the unknown, leaving behind a galaxy that was still trying to figure out what had just happened. The space beyond the Void Gate was unlike anything in the known galaxy. Where normal space was mostly empty with scattered stars and planets, this region was filled with structures that defied explanation. Massive rings of metal and crystal floated, in perfect formation, each one large enough to hold an entire star system. Streams of energy flowed between them like rivers of light, creating patterns that were both beautiful and impossible. Captain Sarah Chen stood on the bridge of the Endeavor, watching the sensor readings with amazement. The ship's instruments were having trouble processing the data. Everything here operated on principles that human science was only beginning to understand. Captain, Dr. Petrov said from his science station, I am reading energy signatures that should not exist. These structures are actively manipulating space and time on a scale I did not think was possible. Lieutenant Kim worked frantically at her navigation console, trying to plot a safe course through the maze of ancient megastructures. Whatever built these things had technology that makes the Galactic Council look like children playing with toy blocks. Chief Engineer Rodriguez appeared on the bridge, his uniform covered in soot and his face showing the kind of excitement that usually led to explosions. Captain, you need to see this. The ship's engines are running better than they should. Something in this space is enhancing our technology. Sarah activated the main view screen and magnified the image of the nearest structure. It was a sphere the size of a moon, covered in geometric patterns that seemed to shift and change as she watched. Energy flowed across its surface like lightning trapped in crystal. Are they active? She asked. Very active, Dr. Petrov replied, but not in any way I recognize. It is like they are waiting for something. The Endeavor moved deeper into the strange region, passing structures that had no comparison in known space, cities that floated without gravity, machines that seemed to be building themselves, gardens of crystalline trees that glowed with their own inner light. Captain, Kim said suddenly, I am detecting artificial gravity fields ahead. Something big. On the view screen, a new structure came into view. This one was different from the others. Where the megastructures were clearly artificial, this looked almost organic. It was a cluster of interconnected spheres, each one pulsing with soft light. Energy flowed between them in patterns that reminded Sarah of neural networks. That is not a machine, Dr. Petrov said, studying his readings. Those are life signs. Very strange life signs, but definitely alive. Alive and aware of us, Kim added. I am detecting scan beams. Whatever is in there knows we are here. Sarah made a decision that would have been considered reckless by most species and perfectly normal by human standards. Open a communication channel, all frequencies. Captain, Rodriguez said, we have no idea what we might be talking to. Only one way to find out, Sarah replied. This is Captain Sarah Chen of the human vessel Endeavor. We come in peace and would like to establish communication. For a moment, nothing happened. Then the space around them filled with light and sound that seemed to come from everywhere at once. The ship's translation system struggled to process the incoming signal, producing a voice that sounded like wind chimes in a storm. Impossible, the voice said. You should not be here. The barrier should have prevented your passage. We made it impenetrable. We are human, Sarah replied, as if that explained everything. In many ways, it did. We would like to talk. The lights around them pulsed in what might have been surprise. Human. This designation is unknown to us. You are organic beings, yet you travel in space. You use technology, yet you are not synthetic. How did you breach the barrier? Sarah looked at her crew and shrugged. We asked it nicely to move. The silence that followed was filled with energy patterns that Dr. Petrov identified as rapid data processing. Whatever they were talking to was thinking very hard and very fast. This is not possible, the voice finally said. The barrier was designed to be absolute. It cannot be asked to do anything. It responds only to the harmonic frequencies that we programmed into it. Maybe you programmed it better than you thought, Kim suggested. The lights around them shifted to new patterns, and suddenly the Endeavor was surrounded by creatures of pure energy. They had no solid form, appearing instead as patterns of light that moved and danced through space. Each one was unique, like a snowflake made of starlight. We are the architects, the voice explained. We built this realm and the barrier that protected it. We have been imprisoned here for 3,000 of your years. Imprisoned? Sarah asked. By who? By ourselves, another voice answered. This one sounding like music played on instruments that did not exist. We made a mistake. A terrible mistake. In our arrogance, we awakened something that should have remained sleeping. The energy beings began to show the humans images, projecting them directly into their minds. Sarah saw the history of the architects, a species that had transcended physical form millions of years ago. They had become beings of pure thought and energy, capable of reshaping matter and manipulating the fundamental forces of the universe. But their power had made them curious about things that were better left alone. They had detected something in the deep void between galaxies, something vast and ancient that existed partially outside normal space and time. Instead of leaving it alone, they had tried to study it. We called it here, the first voice said, filled with regret. We opened a gateway and invited it into our realm. We thought we could control it, learn from it. We were wrong. What happened? Dr. Petrov asked. It came, another architect replied, and reality began to unravel around it. Space and time twisted into shapes that should not exist. Matter and energy behaved according to rules that we did not understand. We realized that we had made contact with something that existed according to laws older than our universe. Images showed the architects' desperate attempt to contain the damage. They had built the barrier not to keep others out, but to keep the entity in. They had trapped themselves along with their mistake, creating a prison that they hoped would protect the rest of the galaxy. So where is this entity now? Sarah asked. The architect's lights dimmed with what might have been embarrassment. It is still here. We have been trying to communicate with it for 3,000 years, but it does not respond to our methods. It seems to be lonely. Lonely? Rodriguez said. You're telling us that this cosmic horror that warps reality is just lonely? We believe so, an architect replied. It creates distortions in space and time, but they appear to be attempts at communication rather than attacks. It is trying to reach out, but its methods are incompatible with our existence. Sarah felt a familiar sensation, the same one she had experienced when looking at the barrier data. A problem that everyone thought was impossible, but maybe it just needed a different approach. Can you show us where it is? She asked. Absolutely not, several architects replied simultaneously. It is far too dangerous. The space around it is twisted beyond recognition. No physical being could survive the approach. Let us be the judge of that, Sarah said. We just broke through a barrier that you thought was impenetrable. Maybe we can try talking to your cosmic horror too. This is madness, one architect said. Probably, Sarah agreed. But humans have a talent for madness that sometimes works. Out well. The architects conferred among themselves, their lights pulsing in rapid patterns that hurt to look at directly. Finally, they reached some kind of consensus. Very well, their spokesperson said. But understand that if you attempt this, you do so at your own risk. We cannot protect you from the effects of proximity to the entity. We understand, Sarah replied. Can you give us coordinates? Follow the energy streams toward the center of our realm, an architect replied. You will know when you are close. Reality becomes flexible in that region. Sarah turned to her crew. Well, team, ready to go talk to a cosmic entity that bends space and time? Do we have a choice? Kim asked. There is always a choice, Sarah replied. But where would be the fun in making the safe one? The Endeavor changed course, following streams of energy toward the heart of the Architect's realm. Behind them, the beings of light watched with a mixture of hope and terror as the humans flew towards something that had kept an entire civilization prisoner for 3,000 years. Sarah had no idea what they would find when they reached their destination, but she was beginning to suspect that the universe's most dangerous problems often turned out to be misunderstandings that just needed the right translator. The space around the Endeavor began to behave strangely as they approached the center of the Architect's realm. Colors appeared that had no names, and shadows fell in directions that did not match any light source. Lieutenant Kim's navigation instruments showed them moving forward, backward, and sideways through time simultaneously. Captain, Dr. Petrov said, his voice tight with concentration as he struggled to read instruments that kept changing their own operating principles. The entity is affecting reality in a sphere roughly 10 kilometers across. Space and time are behaving according to rules that I do not understand. Define behaving, Chief Engineer Rodriguez said from the engine room, where he was manually adjusting systems that kept trying to operate backwards. Well, Dr. Petrov replied, according to my sensors, we are currently moving through last Tuesday while traveling toward next month. Also, our mass has somehow become a color, and our velocity is apparently feeling sad about something. Captain Sarah Chen looked at the main view screen, which showed something that her brain refused to process correctly. It was not exactly a creature, and not exactly a structure. It existed in more dimensions than human senses could handle, appearing as a constantly shifting pattern of impossible geometries. That is our cosmic entity? She asked. That is Gary, Kim said, having decided that giving it a friendly name made the situation less terrifying. Gary? Sarah repeated. It seemed appropriate, Kim explained. Something that warps reality should have a name that does not sound threatening. The entity called Gary noticed their approach. Space around the ship rippled like water, and suddenly the Endeavor was surrounded by manifestations of pure thought made visible. Mathematical equations wrote themselves in fire across the void. Musical notes became solid objects that bounced off the ship's hull. The concept of Tuesday took physical form and waved at them through the view screen. It is trying to communicate, Dr. Petrov said, reading energy patterns that hurt his instrument's feelings. But its method of communication is to make its thoughts physically real. So it is literally showing us what it is thinking, Sarah asked. Yes. And right now it is thinking about loneliness, curiosity, and something that might be the mathematical equivalent of excitement. Sarah made another decision that would have terrified most species and seemed perfectly reasonable to humans. Open a communication channel, all frequencies, all dimensions, and whatever else we have. Captain, Rodriguez said, I should point out that our communication array was not designed to handle calls from entities that exist outside normal space-time. Then we will have to make do, Sarah replied. This is Captain Sarah Chen of the human vessel Endeavor. We would like to talk to you. The response was immediate and overwhelming. Gary tried to communicate by projecting its thoughts directly into reality, creating a cascade of impossible sensations. The crew experienced the taste of purple, the sound of mathematics, and the emotional weight of a supernova's death. But hidden in the chaos, Sarah heard something familiar. Loneliness. The same loneliness she had felt as a child when her family moved to a new planet and she had to make friends all over again. The same loneliness that drove humans to explore space in the first place. You are lonely, she said out loud. The reality distortion stopped suddenly. Gary's attention focused on the ship with an intensity that made the hull plating nervous. Lonely, Gary's voice came through the speakers, though it sounded like it was being translated through 17 different languages and a very confused computer. Yes, lonely. Others do not understand. Others fear. Others build walls. The architects were afraid of you, Sarah said. They thought you were dangerous. Not dangerous, Gary replied, and around them the twisted space began to calm slightly. different, exist in many dimensions. Thoughts become real, cannot control, cannot stop, always alone. Dr. Petrov was frantically taking notes, trying to understand communication with a being that existed partially outside their universe. Captain, I think it experiences reality differently than we do. Its thoughts automatically manifest as physical phenomena. So when it tries to reach out, Kim said, understanding dawning on her face, it accidentally warps space and time around it. Like a person who is too strong accidentally breaking things when they try to be gentle, Rodriguez added. Exactly, Gary said, and the relief in its voice was so strong that it temporarily turned the color of hope. Try to communicate. Reality breaks. Others afraid. Build barrier. Trapped. Alone. Sarah felt her heart go out to the cosmic entity. She had spent her career exploring space, meeting new species, making connections across the galaxy. The idea of being trapped and alone for 3,000 years was heartbreaking. Well, she said, you are not alone anymore. We are here, and we want to be friends. The word friends hit Gary like a physical force. The entity's excitement was so strong that it manifested as a shower of golden lights that made everyone on the ship feel inexplicably happy. Friends? Gary asked. Others have never offered friendship. Always fear, always walls. Humans are good at making friends with things that other people think are scary, Sarah said. We have a talent for it. She looked around the bridge at her crew, who were already adapting to the impossible situation with typical human flexibility. Rodriguez was taking notes on how Gary's reality manipulation might be useful for engineering problems. Kim was plotting ways to use Gary's dimensional abilities for faster-than-light travel. Dr. Petrov was designing experiments to study the entity's unique properties. Gary, Sarah said, would you like to meet some other friends? There are a lot of people outside the barrier who would probably like to meet you. Others will fear, Gary said sadly. Always fear. Maybe, Sarah admitted, but maybe not. And even if they do at first, humans are good at helping people get used to new things. Over the next several hours, Sarah and her crew worked with Gary to solve the problems that had kept the cosmic entity isolated for millennia. They developed a communication system that allowed Gary to talk without accidentally warping reality. They created safety protocols that would let other species interact with the entity without triggering dangerous dimensional effects. Most importantly, they taught Gary how to contain its reality-altering effects to a small, controlled area. It turned out that the entity had never learned to control its abilities because it had never had anyone to teach it. With some guidance and a lot of patience, Gary learned to express itself without accidentally turning thoughts into physical objects. The architects watched in amazement as the humans accomplished in hours what they had failed to do in 3,000 years. The secret was not advanced technology or superior intelligence. It was the simple act of treating Gary as a friend who needed help, rather than a problem to be solved. When they finally returned to Council space, the endeavor was accompanied by Gary, who had learned to project a small, non-threatening avatar to interact with physical beings. The cosmic entity was excited to meet new people and see new places after being alone for so long. The Galactic Council was initially terrified when Sarah announced that she had brought back the cosmic horror that had required an impenetrable barrier to contain. But their fear quickly turned to fascination as Gary demonstrated its abilities in controlled, safe ways. The entity could manipulate space and time in small areas, creating laboratories where scientists could study temporal mechanics safely. It could generate exotic matter for advanced research projects. Most remarkably, it could serve as a living gateway to other dimensions, opening up entirely new fields of exploration. In return, Gary got what it had wanted all along: friends, conversation, and a place to belong. The entity established a permanent residence in a specially designed research station where scientists and explorers from across the galaxy could come to study and learn. Admiral Zexathari's final report to the Galactic Council included a recommendation that humans be placed in charge of all first-contact situations involving potentially dangerous entities. Their ability to make friends with cosmic horrors was noted as a unique and valuable skill. Captain Sarah Chen received commendations from every major species in the galaxy, though she insisted that the real credit belonged to her crew and their willingness to try things that made no sense to anyone else. Chief Engineer Rodriguez was given unlimited access to the Council's research facilities, where he began developing new technologies based on Gary's reality manipulation abilities. His first project was a universal adhesive that could stick anything to anything else across multiple dimensions. Dr. Petrov became the galaxy's leading expert on trans-dimensional physics, writing papers with titles like Making Friends with, Mathematics, A Human Approach to Cosmic Communication, and Why Asking Nicely Works Better Than Shooting, a study in diplomatic physics. Lieutenant Kim was promoted to head of the Council's new Department of Impossible Navigation, where she specialized in plotting courses through regions of space that should not exist. And Gary got to experience something it had never known before: belonging. The cosmic entity spent its days helping scientists, teaching students, and making friends across the galaxy. Its loneliness became a memory, replaced by the joy of connection and community. The architects were freed from their self-imposed prison, able to return to normal space for the first time in 3,000 years. They